Yeah, we talk about fantasy football a lot. Chris, it seems like we agree on almost every player.
Do we? I don't know if I agree with that. I think we disagree plenty.
All right, well, let's pick some of those players out. I think there's a few that we definitely are far apart on. Let's start with a stud running back that, man, I just don't see it this year, but somehow you like Josh Jacobs?
I do. I like Josh Jacobs on the Packers. I mean, what's not to like here? He's going to be the lead back in this offense. I know last year his efficiency took a big hit. He may not be highly efficient again this year, but this is an offense that you got to like for fantasy. We saw it last year with Jordan Love. It was a fantasy-friendly offense. He's going to be in that Aaron Jones role, which is the more valuable role here. And the only guys behind him are maybe A.J. Dillon, who would not surprise me at all if he gets cut. I mean, his contract was absurd, not even a real NFL contract, it seems like. And then the rookie Marshawn Lloyd. And I know it's easy to like Marshawn Lloyd. But look, last year we were hearing a bunch of rumblings like, oh, Tank Bigsby is going to eat into Travis Etienne's workload. Oh, Zach Charbonnet is going to really, kill Kenneth Walker's workload. And neither of that happened because rookies oftentimes take time and sometimes they're not good enough to take touches away from a starting running back. We know Josh Jacobs is a good workhorse running back in the NFL. And while I do think there's a chance Marshawn Lloyd could take touches from him, I'm not going to bet on that. I'm going to bet on this being like a Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby situation or a Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet situation. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be the workhorse running back in this Green Bay offense, which is going to be a very good offense in real life and for fantasy. So I think Josh Jacobs once again jumps in and becomes a top 12, maybe even a top 10 running back this year.
Well, to me, you're talking best case scenario. Look, I know we all view Josh Jacobs as one of the top fantasy running backs because of his monster season, which was, by the way, 2 years ago, not last year. Do we really just not remember that he only averaged 3.5 yards per carry last year? That the whole first half of the season, everyone was bitterly disappointed in him and how he was doing. And then he wound up missing several games. I mean, what about last year makes you want to draft him just as high or higher this year? Going to Green Bay, okay, yeah, that's a better team, but is it really a better situation? Because you talk about that Aaron Jones role. Were you really, doing backflips? You've had Aaron Jones in your fantasy team last year. He's also a guy that was boom a few weeks and then bust a lot of other weeks and also got hurt. Look, they just drafted a rookie running back who I like just as much, if not better, than Josh Jacobs because I can get him much later, and I think that he's got more explosiveness. I think he's going to see a decent amount of carries. Look, I don't think Josh Jacobs is going to play the workhorse role in this offense. And also, let's not forget that when a running back does wind up getting paid, as Jacobs finally got paid, it usually doesn't end well. All right. I just don't think this is it. I think we've seen the best Jacobs has to offer. I'm not paying up RB1 price for him. I am out. All right. It seems like another year we're going to have to agree to disagree on George Pickens. Yeah, I'm still all in on him despite all the changes this year. They're only good. Again, that three-headed monster of Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, and Mason Rudolph. All he's doing is getting an upgrade here with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Either one is going to be good for Pickens. How could it not be good for him? Look, usually when a guy leads the league in yards per reception, it's one of these kind of one-trick pony deep threats, guy who only runs the deep routes. George Pickens averaged 18.1 yards per reception, but he actually had 63 catches, and he had over 100 targets. And that was with that offense, with those three quarterbacks that don't even need to be mentioned again. Again, you're talking about a quarterback that can throw the ball deep in Russell Wilson. You're talking about an offense that's going to now feature George Pickens because Deontay Johnson is gone. The targets will go up. The catchable target rate should go up. I don't get why you don't view him as at least a high-end wide receiver too.
Well, I'll give you reason number one, Arthur Smith. That's right. Arthur Smith is a new offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'm not doing this again. I'm not falling for the Arthur Smith trap. I mean, we said it last year about Drake London. Like, this is a talented wide receiver. He's the only guy they have to throw to. And somehow, Arthur Smith found other guys to throw to, other guys to get the ball to. He just will. Calvin Austin is going to probably, get more targets than George Pickens some weeks. Cordero Patterson will probably get ridiculous targets over George Pickens. It's just a frustration I don't want to deal with. And you talk about the quarterbacks, sure. Is Russell Wilson better than what they had last year? Probably. Justin Fields? Almost certainly. But it doesn't matter. It's still not great for George Pickens. It's not like these guys are going to, take George Pickens to the next level. And George Pickens is a receiver. I think George Pickens is a good receiver. I think he's a very talented football player. I think he's great with the ball in his hands. But I don't think he's an elite wide receiver. Like we saw with DJ Moore last year, who's one of the best wide receivers in the game, what Justin Fields did for him. I just don't think George Pickens is on that level. And this is going to be an offense, whether it's Russ or Fields, still going to be bad. Again, Arthur Smith going to find ways to just frustrate you in fantasy and use random guys, get near the goal line and, give jet sweeps to whoever, whenever. It's just not a headache I want to deal with again this year. I think Pickens in best ball is fine because you can just deal with the spike weeks and ignore those terrible weeks. But in your redraft leagues, I think you're going to be frustrated. But if you take Joe Burrow in your redraft leagues, I think you're going to be far less than frustrated. I think you're going to be very excited because Joe Burrow is going at an extreme discount for a QB who is an elite QB. It's like people forgot this guy went over 4,000 passing yards 2 years in a row, and just 3 years ago was a top 3 fantasy QB when he actually stayed healthy all year. Now, I know what the argument against Joe Burrow is. He never stays healthy for the full year. But you only say he never does until he doesn't. There's been many guys that we say they never stay healthy. The example I always use is Keenan Allen. The first 3 years of his career, Keenan Allen was never on the field, always banged up. And then he didn't miss a game for 5 or 6 straight years. Unless a guy has something crazy going on like Christian Watson, injuries are relatively fluky. Joe Burrow's had these fluky preseason injuries that have kind of gotten him off to slow starts or basically derailed his season. But when he's healthy, he's an elite quarterback. He's an elite fantasy quarterback. And he still has elite weapons because Jamar Chase, we know, is one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL. Whether T. Higgins wants to or not, he's going to play for the Cincinnati Bengals this year. And they drafted one of my favorite wide receivers, Jermaine Burton. He's got tons of weapons. He's in a great offense. He's an elite QB. And just a few years ago, he was the QB3 in fantasy. If he stays healthy again this year, he's going to easily be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 QB. And you're going to be happy you took the discount.
I won't be happy because I'm not taking him. Honestly, I think there's no player in the NFL that gets a pass more than Joe Burrow. It's like ever since he came into the league because, of course, won a national championship, #1 pick, and then at a very young age went to the Super Bowl. But yet, let's look at the reality. In fantasy football, there was an early peak, and since then, it's been more disappointment than anything. Now, for me, it's not even about the health and how many games might he miss. I just assume that he'll stay healthy, just like I would assume for any other quarterback. So it's about the fact that in the 10 games he did play last year, he was actually kind of bad. And again, people just tend to ignore this. I mean, he only averaged 230 yards per game. You remember the whole first half of the season where everyone's like, what's wrong with Joe Burrow? Is it a health thing? What is it? This whole offense was anemic for several weeks. And then he wound up getting hurt, missing the rest of the season. And somehow Jake Browning was putting up better numbers than Joe Burrow. Now, I don't think that Joe Burrow's a dud or a bust, but I just don't understand treating him like this elite fantasy quarterback when besides being unreliable, he's not getting you any rushing upside whatsoever, so you don't have that to fall back on. He needs to throw a lot. He needs to be effective. You need everything almost to break right. And right now it isn't, because let's also go back to the fact that T. Higgins is a big unknown here. I mean, he says he's going to play. He's probably going to be there early in the season, but we've already started to see the red flags. Adam Schefter, pretty reliable source, even said he wouldn't be surprised if something happens and he gets banged up here mid-late season, that he just calls it a day and says, I'm going to, for business reasons, just sit out the rest of the year. So there goes your #2 receiver, who also, by the way, along with Jamar Chase, has had a lot of injuries himself. A new offensive coordinator. We don't think there's going to be any transition here, maybe some trouble getting on the same page. Joe Mixon is gone. There's going to be a new backfield to work with. Look, I just think Joe Burrow is overrated. I'm just going to say it in fantasy. There's plenty of guys with more upside I can take later in the draft. Now there's another young player with a new offensive coordinator that I am all over. And Chris, I just don't see you jumping on board the JSN train here. Let me tell you, Jackson Smith-Njigba was the #1 drafted receiver in his class for a reason. I know we were a little disappointed last year, but this is a different situation. He was a rookie. right? Pete Carroll is gone. This is a good thing. We're going to actually open up to a modern offense. Ryan Grubb from Washington, he's going to have this offense a little bit more diverse route tree for guys like, especially JSN. He was used just so sparingly. This is somebody who talked about reception perception a lot with Matt Harmon. JSN's reception perception shows green on 7 of the 10 possible routes. He was very effective. He just wasn't used the right way. They're going to find ways to use him. He's going to get more targets than last year. I think this offense will just be better. And I think that he's being very undervalued this season. I know that you're not huge on guys like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Why can't you be big on JSN?
Well, the reason I can't be high on JSN is because if I'm not that high on DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, how can I be high on JSN? I mean, even if the offense is better, I don't think JSN is going to overtake DK Metcalf as the number 1 wide receiver here. And even if you told me right now he's going to overtake Tyler Lockett, okay, that's fine. How good was Tyler Lockett last year? In fact, how good has Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf been since Geno Smith became the starting QB? Not very good. Like, they've had their moments, but overall, not very good. Now you got 3 guys there. You got DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. Even if JSN is technically the number 2, Tyler Lockett isn't going away. He's not disappearing. And if it's not Geno Smith, you say, well, maybe they benched Geno Smith. Oh, okay. Then you get Sam Howell. You really want Sam Howell? He was a disaster last year, and he was a disaster for fantasy, a disaster for Terry McLaurin, for that whole offense. I don't see why going to Seattle is going to fix Sam Howell. So while I like JSN as a prospect, and I think JSN could be a great wide receiver, I think he needs Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf to completely disappear, or he needs a much better quarterback, and he doesn't have either of those this year. So I think he'll be better than last year because he almost can't be worse, but I still don't think he'll be good enough to where you're glad you drafted him in fantasy.
All right, maybe we'll never agree about those players, but we do agree that these are league-winning players you need in your draft.